In this video, we're going to be taking a look at 15 super easy beginner shortcuts to get you started in Adobe Photoshop. So just before we begin learning all of the shortcuts, obviously it's impossible to cover every shortcut in Photoshop, so I've tried to make it very simple and only include the ones that I think are slightly harder to find if you're a beginner and just starting to learn. There are obviously shortcuts for all of the tools in Photoshop, which are very handy to know, but I'm not going to focus on those too much because I think you can find them quite easily. In order to find those shortcuts, if you're unaware, is if, for example, I wanted to know the shortcut to the brush tool, if I find the brush tool on the left-hand toolbar, as you can see, this infographic already shows me the shortcut, which is B, but anytime this doesn't come up, all you have to do is hold on the icon, and as you can see in the right-hand corner here, we have all of the shortcuts. So for the brush tool, the shortcut is B, but if I went to the Eyedropper Tool, for example, it is I. And as you can see, this is on the right-hand side, the same if I use the Lasso Tool, which is L, and so forth. Great, so the first shortcut we're actually going to learn is how to free transform something really quickly. So in order to free transform this image, all I have to do is make sure I have the layer selected, and then the shortcut to free transforming is Command and T. And basically this is a very handy and useful shortcut to know because this allows you to reposition your layer, allows you to rotate your layer, and also to scale your layer. So that's just a really handy shortcut to know in order to resize, rotate, or reposition your layer. Now you can do this with any object. It doesn't just have to be an image layer. You can also do it with a text object, for example. And if you just want to confirm your choices, all you have to do is go to the top here and press on this tick. And as you can see, now my image has been resized and rotated. Great, so the next shortcut that we have is actually very useful in this situation. Perhaps I want to undo the changes that I've just made. And in order to do that, what we can do is press Command and Z or Ctrl and Z for Windows on our keyboard. And as you can see, I can just quickly go back through all of the stages and undo any of the changes that I've made. Now, one thing to be aware of is this is only going to work up to a certain point. Photoshop will remember only the last 50 or so actions that you undertook. However, you can also change this if you want to make sure that it lasts for longer. So the next shortcut that we have is to zoom in and out. So in order to zoom in, all you have to do is press Command and plus, the little plus sign in your top right hand corner of your keyboard. That's Ctrl and plus for Windows. And as you can see, just every time I tap on that plus with the command held in, I can zoom in. If you want to zoom out, all you have to do is press Command and minus or Ctrl and minus for Windows. Now, another great feature is if I'm zoomed in really far and I want to quickly zoom out so I can see the entire canvas, all I have to do is press Command and 0 on my keyboard. As you can see, this will jump to the entirety of my canvas. I can then continue by using Command plus and minus in order to zoom in and out. It's exactly the same if you're zoomed out very far and you press Command and 0, it will take you to an overview of your entire canvas, which is very handy. Great, so the next shortcut that we have is how to duplicate layers. So for example, I have this image layer. Now there's two shortcuts that you can use to actually duplicate this layer. The first one is if you hold Alt or Option on your keyboard. As you can see, your cursor changes to these two arrows, one black and one white. If you then select on the layer itself and hold and drag, as you can see, you can now duplicate your layer and just release in order to make that duplicate. In the layers panel, we've also now got an extra layer. This is also the case if you want to duplicate in the layers panel. All you have to do is once again hold Option or Alt and then drag and drop. And as you can see, we've created a new layer and I can reposition this just to show you that we have 3. And once again, I'm going to do that with Command and Z. Now the second way to duplicate your layers is if you've got the correct layer selected, all you have to do is press Command and J. And as you can see, this has actually duplicated the layer. So this just means that you don't actually have to go and drag and select anything, but instead it will actually just duplicate your layer on top of the layer that you already had. So that's just another great shortcut if you want to be able to create loads of duplicates of one layer. Now the next shortcut that we have is how to bring up your rulers. As you can see at the moment, I already have rulers activated. So as you can see at the top here, I have loads of rulers, and on the left here, I also have one for the horizontal and one for the vertical axis. Now, if you can't see your rulers, all you have to do is press Command and R. As you can see, I've now removed them, but if I press Command and R, as you can see, it now comes back. Now, the great thing about rulers in Photoshop is they allow us to create guides as well as be much more precise in dimensions. So in order to create guides, all you have to do is actually hover over one of the rulers, hold your left mouse key and drag out. And as you can see, this line appears. It will actually snap to the edges of the layer that you currently have selected. So I currently have the image copy layer selected. And if I release here, as you can see, I now have a guide, which if I hold and drag and move my image copy layer, as you can see, it will always snap to this guide. I can do the same for the vertical axis and drop one here. As you can see, it will snap to these two guides, which is very, very handy. I'm actually just going to quickly delete this layer just so we only have one layer to work with. Now, in some cases, it's nice to be able to actually preview our work without seeing lots of guides all over the screen. So the next shortcut is how we can hide and unhide our guides. So in order to hide the guides, all we have to do is hold Command and H or Ctrl and H for Windows on our keyboard. As you can see, they now disappear. But we haven't actually deleted the guides. They are still there. They're just hidden at the moment. So in order to unhide them, all we have to do once again is press Command and H. And as you can see, we can now see the guides. So those are just a quick two shortcuts for the rulers and the guides, which are just very handy to know so you can be much more precise in your designs. So I'm just going to hide the rulers and I'm going to hide the guides. Now, speaking of guides and rulers in Adobe Photoshop, we can actually also bring up a grid, which is also very handy for when we want to arrange things on our canvas. So in order to bring this up, all we have to do is press Command and an apostrophe on our keyboard. And as you can see, this now brings up the grid, or that's Ctrl and apostrophe for Windows. Now, if you're wondering how you can actually customize your grid, because this might not be the layout that you want, all you have to do is go to Photoshop at the top left-hand corner, Preferences, and then go to the option that says Guides, Grid, and Slices. And from here, you can actually customize your grid. So just like with the guides that we had earlier, if I actually drag and move our image layer, as you can see, when I get close to one of the edges of one of the grid boxes, it will once again snap to those corners. So that's just a great way to be able to organize things in Photoshop by being a bit more precise. I'm once again going to undo that using the shortcut that we learned, which was Command and Z. And then I'm going to hide the grid once more, just like we had with the guides. All I have to do is press Command and apostrophe once more. And as you can see, our grid has now disappeared. So the next few shortcuts are going to be specifically for selections in Adobe Photoshop. So to bring up the Marquee Tool, which is one way of creating selections in Photoshop, all you have to do is press M on your keyboard. As you can see, your cursor now changes. And from here, we can draw a selection just by holding our left mouse key. And as you can see, I can draw a window in order to create a selection. Now, there's one or two handy shortcuts that we can learn in order to make it easier to create more complex selections. So first of all, in order to add to our selection, so we have an initial selection drawn, but we might want to add an extra box up here, for example. All you have to do is hold Shift on your keyboard. And as you can see, our cursor changes and there's a small plus symbol in the bottom right-hand corner. And as you can see, all I have to do is draw and hold, and I've now added to my selection. Now I can do this in reverse, obviously too, so I can also subtract from my selection. And in order to do that, all I have to do is hold Option or Alt for Windows on my keyboard. And as you can see, there's now a small minus symbol on our cursor. And now I can hold and drag and actually cut away part of my selection. So that's just an easy way in order to actually customize our selection so that we get the right one without having to go to the top here and actually change these manually. Another thing that we might want to do is actually select the inverse of what we currently have selected. So to demonstrate this a bit more easily, if I just quickly move the selection over my image and press Delete on my keyboard or backspace, as you can see, I've now deleted part of my layer. But in some cases, you might actually want to delete the inverse of what I've now deleted. So instead of deleting everything within the selection, I now want to make a selection of everything outside of the original selection. So I can quickly undo that by pressing Command and Z. And in order to inverse a selection, all you have to do is press Command, Shift and I, or Control, Shift and I for Windows on your computer. As you can see, our selection has now been inversed. So instead of just having these selections in the middle, we've also got the selection line at the top. And now instead of these parts in the middle being selected, anything within the space has now been selected. So if I now press backspace, as you can see, everything on the outside of our original selection has now been deleted. Now, the next shortcut that we need to know when it comes to selections in Photoshop is how to deselect our selections. So we don't want to always have to go to select and deselect in order to deselect our selections. All we want to do is press the shortcut, which in this case is Command and D or Control and D for Windows. So that's just another great one to know, which makes it much easier to quickly jump on to our next task. So the next two shortcuts that I think are essential for you to know as a beginner are two shortcuts that are both related to color in Photoshop. So first of all, there are times when we might want to quickly be able to select a color in our images, so we can set that as our foreground color in our color selectors here. But we don't want to always have to go all the way to press the eyedropper tool or go to the color itself in order to select it. Instead, we might want to use the eyedropper tool immediately using our shortcut. Now, I know I said I wouldn't cover any of the shortcuts for the tools themselves, but I think this one is essential and just speeds up your workflow so much quicker. So in order to bring up the eyedropper tool, all you have to do is press the letter I on your keyboard. This is both for Windows and Mac. As you can see, we're now on the eyedropper tool, and I can literally go ahead and select any color within our image. So for example, I can select this blue here, and it will now be set as the foreground color for us. Now there will also be cases where we want to quickly switch between the foreground and background colors. So in order to do this without having to press on these two arrows here, all you have to do is press the letter X on your keyboard. And as you can see, I've now switched to the background color, which is now the foreground color. If I keep pressing X, it will switch again and so forth as many times as I want. Now in order to reset these two foreground and background colors to their original colors, all you have to do is press the letter D on your keyboard. And as you can see, this is now reset all of them. So we've actually got the standard black and white colors. Now the next shortcut that I think is essential to know as a beginner, but is slightly more advanced than all of the shortcuts that we have actually already covered, is the brush tool shortcut. So what I'm going to do is actually delete this layer to start off with. So in order to delete this layer, all I have to do is go to the layers panel and hold and drag the layer and move it to the trash can at the bottom. As you can see, we've now got a blank canvas. So in order to bring up the brush tool, all I have to do is press B on my keyboard. This isn't actually the shortcut that we're going to learn, but it is another shortcut just to know. Now, as you can see at the moment, I can't actually draw anything, and this is because I have my current background layer selected. And because my current background layer is a smart object, I can't actually draw on that directly. So in order to create a new layer, there is a shortcut for creating new layers. This isn't one of the shortcuts that I included in this video, because I personally don't think it's very handy, but if you do want to know what it is, it's Command Shift and N, or Control Shift and N for Windows. And as you can see, this brings up a small window where you can actually go ahead and create a new layer. Now, I think this is a slightly tedious process because you actually get this window instead of just creating a new layer. So I think it's always just easier to go to the layers panel and actually create a new layer using the button at the bottom. So now we've got a new layer created, so we can actually go ahead and draw something. And to start off with, all I'm going to do is actually quickly switch between our foreground and background colors, because at the moment I've got black selected and I know that's not really going to pop out nicely from the background. So in order to switch, I'm just going to use the shortcut that we just learned, which was X on our keyboard. As you can see, white is now my foreground color. So when it comes to the brush tool, we can obviously draw anything using our cursor, but often we want to be able to change our brush sizes and our brush hardness very quickly. And you can do this by right-clicking and actually using these sliders to control the size of your brush and the hardness of your brush. So you can change it quite easily like that. But there is actually a very handy shortcut that allows you to do this much more quickly. So I'm just going to quickly undo that so we've got a bit more space. So in order to use the shortcut for Mac, all you have to do is hold Option and Control on your keyboard. And for Windows, I believe it is Control and Alt, and then you have to right-click instead of left-click, which it is for Mac. So for Mac, all you have to do is Control and Option and right-click. And as you can see, I can now actually change some of these parameters by holding onto all of these keys and my left mouse button. For Windows, it'll be the same, but you have to hold Control and Alt and your right mouse key. So what you can do is actually change the hardness and diameter of your brush this way. So in order to change the diameter, all you have to do is slide your mouse to the right to increase the diameter of your brush, or slide it to the left in order to decrease it until you reach 1 pixel. In order to change the hardness of your brush, if you move your cursor down, you'll actually increase the hardness until you reach 100%. And if you keep going up, you'll actually go all the way to 0%, which is the softest brush you can create. So for example, if I wanted a larger brush, so I move my cursor to the right and I wanted to increase the hardness to 100%, and then let go of all of the buttons and then draw something using my left mouse key. As you can see, we now have a very large and hard brush. If I quickly undo that and then hold in Control and Option again, and actually go to the left in order to decrease the size of my brush, and move my cursor up in order to decrease the hardness of the brush to make it softer, as you can see, I can now draw with a much softer brush. So this is just a great way to be able to quickly change these two parameters without actually having to go to the windows in order to change them with the sliders. And I think you can be slightly more precise with the shortcuts. And in my opinion, it's the best shortcut in Photoshop at the moment. I'm just going to quickly undo that once more. Now, in order to change the opacity of the brush, as you can see at the top here, you can change that with the slider or the drop down here. But what you can also do is actually press numbers on your keyboard in order to change this parameter without having to go to the slider. So for example, if I press 1 on my keyboard, it will change the opacity to 10%. So for example, if I draw now, as you can see, the opacity of the brush is very, very low. If I press 5, it will go to 50%. And if I press 9, it will obviously go to 90%. And as you can see, this brush has a much higher opacity. Just going to quickly undo that. If you want to be slightly more precise, you can actually type out a full number. So let's say you wanted the brush to be at 34%. You can type in 3 and then 4. As you can see, I've set the opacity to 34%. And if I wanted another one, so let's say 73, so 7 and 3. And as you can see, I can now draw and have an opacity of 73%. And I can obviously just jump to 100% by also typing in 100. And as you can see, I've now set it to 100%. So this is just a great way to quickly change the opacity without actually having to go to the box at all. You don't have to have the box selected or have anything to do with the box in order to change the opacity. Now, the final shortcut, if I just quickly undo that, is how to actually save your project. So obviously to save a project, all you have to do is press Command and S on your keyboard, and it has now saved this document because I already had saved it in advance. But if I wanted to be able to go to the Save As option very quickly, all I have to do is press Command, Shift and S. And as you can see, it brings up the Save As window. I just quickly cancel that. And if I want to be able to save a copy, which is now how you save JPEGs, PNGs, PDFs, etc., all you have to do is press Command, Option and S, which will be Control, Alt and S for Windows. And as you can see, that brings up Save a Copy. So those were 15 quick shortcuts for beginners in Adobe Photoshop. I hope you found those useful and you'll be able to use them in your day-to-day practice of Photoshop. Do remember to leave a like on this video if you found it useful, and also remember to subscribe to the channel to make sure you never miss a new Photoshop tutorial.